There's this feeling I've carried for as long as I can remember, like I'm standing on the edge of a quiet storm, watching the clouds gather even when the sky is clear. It's a strange kind of tension, one that's hard to pinpoint or explain. Nothing in particular is wrong, and yet deep inside, something tells me that something will go wrong. It's not a sharp fear with a clear target. It's an invisible threat that lingers just beyond the edges of my awareness. I'm always waiting, bracing myself for the next wave of trouble that never quite arrives, but I feel it coming just the same. I remember nights lying awake, heart pounding, palms sweaty, scanning the dark for signs of danger that weren't really there. The house was silent, but my mind refused to be silent with it. Instead, it spun stories, complex, unwelcome scripts of what-ifs that unraveled any chances of peace. In those moments, I wasn't afraid of anything tangible. I was afraid of the feeling itself, that quiet, creeping sense that something bad was just around the corner. It became part of my daily life, a background noise that never turned off. Sometimes during the day, even in the middle of calm, I'd feel it rush up again. It would hit me unexpectedly, like when I'm driving or sitting in a meeting, and suddenly a thought crashes through. What if this all falls apart? The thought isn't tied to a real threat in those moments. It's just there, uninvited, like a shadow clinging to my side. The irony is that often my life is going smoothly, things are stable, even good. But my body, my mind, are already bracing for disaster, as if rehearsing for a storm that never blows in. I used to think this was just me being dramatic or paranoid. I thought everyone sometimes had worries, and maybe I was just extra anxious. But over time, I realized this feeling wasn't about overthinking or negativity alone. There was something deeper at play, a constant state of early alarm wired into me in such a way that even silence felt suspicious. My mind learned to read neutral moments as signals, turning calm into caution, peace into suspicion. Even my moments of rest were tinged by a readiness to react, as if my nervous system could not fully relax. Friends would tell me to just relax or stop worrying so much. And as if it were that simple, I tried. But the feeling didn't listen. It was a ghost looming in my psyche, whispering warnings without reason. I found myself checking and rechecking, anticipating catastrophes that never happened. My thoughts were trapped in loops of what could go wrong, exhausting and confusing me. I didn't want to live like this, like a sentry on constant watch, exhausted and unfulfilled. What's worse was how this feeling began to shape my relationship with the world around me. Trust became difficult. I would question moments of happiness as if they were a setup for disappointment. When something good happened, instead of enjoying it, I braced for the downturn. It's almost like my mind betrayed me, casting doubt on what should have been joyful or peaceful experiences. I created walls around myself without realizing it, sharper defenses spun out of vague fear. Looking back, I can see how this invisible, unnamed fear overshadowed everything. My decisions, my energy, my own sense of self. I was caught in a pattern that felt impossible to break. The feeling wasn't tied to specific events or failures. It was just there, an ache beneath the surface that nothing was quite right even when everything seemed fine. This feeling wasn't intuition, it was something else. Something more complicated. Something inside me that had learned to expect the worst before it even appeared. And that's why I've spent so much time unraveling this experience. This quiet, persistent dread. Because it isn't unique to me. So many of us live with this unseen weight, this invisible alarm ringing in the background of our lives. We carry with us a readiness for a crisis that doesn't come, a suspicion that silently diverts our joy and colors our moments of calm. But in that story, there is also hope. There is the possibility of learning to recognize this feeling for what it is, without letting it control us or dictate our lives. It's not about eliminating fear entirely. Fear has its place, but about refusing to be imprisoned by it. About noticing when our bodies react as if to danger when danger isn't real, and gently rewiring that response. I want to share with you the ways I came to understand this feeling better, the insights that helped me separate learned anxiety from genuine threat. I want to invite you to explore this with me, to recognize the patterns that might be shaping your experience. This journey isn't about quick fixes or empty platitudes. It's about gentle honesty, compassion for ourselves, and practical steps toward reclaiming our peace. If you've ever found yourself caught in that restless anticipation, holding your breath for something to go wrong, or doubting moments of calm, you're not alone. And it's not a flaw or something broken in you. It's the story of a nervous system doing its best to keep you safe, in a world that doesn't always feel safe at all. So if you're ready, let's begin the journey to understand this quiet fear, to stop living as if danger lurks always just out of sight, and to find a new way to live in the moments that are actually safe. Because peace is possible, even if it feels like a stranger right now. And I believe that inside every one of us is the power to calm our inner storm. There was a moment, not long ago, that crystallized everything for me. I was sitting in a crowded cafe, the hum of conversations and clinking cups all around, yet inside, an uneasy current ran beneath my calm exterior. Suddenly, I noticed my chest tightening, an old companion stepping in quietly. At first, I brushed it off, chalking it up to stress. But as the minutes passed, my mind spiraled into scenarios wildly improbable. What if the conversation nearby is about me? What if my phone buzzes with bad news? I caught myself scanning the room for threats that existed solely in my imagination. It hit me then. My body had become an elaborate alert system, wired to flag danger where none existed. In that crowded cafe, I realized I'd become a detective of illusions, piecing together innocent fragments into ominous puzzles. It is as if my internal radar had lost discrimination, signaling false alarms continuously. What's intriguing is how subtle the triggers can be. A fleeting glance from a stranger, a sudden silence, a shift in tone during a casual talk. Those small flickers, barely noticeable to others, ignite a cascade inside me, triggering my nervous system like a flare in the night. At times, I feel like a lighthouse keeper, endlessly vigilant, watching signals through foggy lenses that distort reality. My body's hypervigilance operates on an autopilot shaped by countless invisible experiences etched deep within. I recall a childhood story from a close friend that echoed this. She described how, growing up in a turbulent household, she became so attuned to unpredictability that even calm was suspicious. An uneventful afternoon might have felt like a setup, the calm before a storm. Her nervous system learned to interpret peace as a prelude to chaos, forever anticipating a sudden shift, an ingrained alert mechanism hardwired over years. When I heard her tell this, it was as if her story was a reflection of my own hidden wiring and thousands of others who live with an internal landscape painted by uncertainty. These conditioned responses go beyond simple worry. They dictate how we breathe, how we hold our muscles, even how we move. In my case, I noticed my posture twisted into a subtle readiness, shoulders slightly tense as if bracing for impact. My hands would clench when I sat still, and my jaw tightened after hours of unconscious strain. It's as though my body was rehearsing a threat that never arrived, persistently preparing for a defensive stance. These physiological patterns feed into the mental maelstrom, creating a loop where body and mind keep reinforcing each other's alarm bells. Before recognizing this, I used to mistake these signals as proof that danger was imminent or my intuition was warning me. However, the truth is more complex. The system responsible for survival was functioning with outdated information, reacting to distant echoes rather than actual present hazards. This disconnect between the triggers and reality created a fog, blurring the line between real threats and shadows cast by past experiences. The nervous system's overreaction turned ordinary moments into battlegrounds, draining energy and postponing peace indefinitely. Reflecting on this, I see how hard it can be to step back from this wired state. Imagine trying to watch a movie on a screen that flickers uncontrollably, distorting every image, making it impossible to enjoy the story unfolding. That was my relationship to the outside world. Even when safe and secure, I was trapped behind a lens fractured by anticipation. The moments meant for relaxation were overshadowed by preparation for disaster. It's a paradox. Our survival system, meant to protect, ends up withholding the ease and pleasure available in the here and now. I remember a turning point when a close friend asked me, "What do you really feel when all that alarm settles down?" At first, I was puzzled. I had trouble describing what peace felt like because I'd grown so accustomed to the hum of tension. It wasn't absence of fear I needed, but a new way to rest in safety without dismissing caution altogether. Over time, I started exploring subtle signs of genuine calm, noticing how the rhythm of my breathing changed when not caught in loops of anticipation, how my gaze softened when I wasn't scanning the environment for threats. These moments became gateways to recognizing that my inner warning system could be gently retrained, learning to distinguish between what demands attention and what requires surrender. Now, consider how these patterns play out when you face routine challenges, unexpected emails, uncertain conversations, or waiting for news. The initial reaction might be a surge in adrenaline, a silent drumbeat of prepare for impact that floods your senses. Recognizing when this trajectory begins is crucial because it allows you to intercept the cycle before it strengthens. I found that simply naming the sensation, like describing it as a false alarm, diminished its power. It took away the mystery and the control it had over me. Instead of fighting the feeling, I learned to observe it with curiosity, gently acknowledging the nervous system's old programming while choosing not to feed it with imagined catastrophes. The challenge lies in nurturing a dialogue between the brain's alert systems and the present moment's reality. It's a delicate balance, honoring our evolutionary instincts to protect ourselves without letting past echoes hijack our daily lives. I encourage you to think about your own inner radar. Where does it shine brightly on shadows that don't exist? When you find the courage to question those signals, you reclaim space for clarity, freedom, and unexpected peace to enter. There was a time when I found myself trapped in a crowded subway car during rush hour, the relentless pressing of bodies and the clamor of urgent footsteps around me magnifying a strange restlessness inside. But it wasn't the jostling crowd that unsettled me. It was the unpredictable flutter beneath my ribs, an invisible thread tightening and pulling as though forewarning me of unseen trouble. Yet, no calamity approached. The train moved steadily. The people kept chatting or reading. The tension I carried had detached from any external cause, an echo originating somewhere deep inside, unbound from immediate circumstance. In that moment, I realized this unrest functioned like a shadow cast by past encounters, an insurgent ghost that refused to yield to reason. My mind wrestled with uncertainty, searching endlessly for a cause, a justification for the apprehension swelling out of nowhere. It reminded me of a candle flickering unevenly in a still room, casting unsettling shapes on the walls, making objects morph into distorted forms. This inner turbulence distorted reality, convinced me of impending trouble, and I was powerless to resist its pull. The source wasn't tangible. It was an intricate web of learned responses and silent warnings, rehearsed tirelessly by experience rather than fact. It wasn't until I told a close friend about these episodes that I noticed how much they affected not just my mood, but also my ability to engage with life authentically. "You're holding onto a script written long ago," she said gently. "Sometimes, the mind saves us by rehearsing danger, even if there's no stage for the drama anymore." Her words cut through a fog, making me aware of how I'd been playing a part one didn't agree with, a role scripted by fears anchored in histories I hadn't fully processed. I realized my internal narrative was stuck on replay, projecting old anxieties onto present moments, clouding joy and robbing me of spontaneity. On a particularly restless night, unable to fall asleep, I decided to try something different than turning to distractions or self-criticism. I lit a small candle on my bedside table and let its gentle glow anchor my attention. I focused on the dance of the flame, the way it oscillated, breathing with fragile grace. As I did, I noticed the uneasy restlessness subtly shifting, lessening as I anchored myself in the present through this simple act. It was as though my body recognized the deliberate tenderness as a cue to downshift from paranoia to peace. This quiet ritual became a pivotal tool, reminding me that the body holds stories and can be guided toward release through intentional tenderness and presence. I also began keeping a journal titled Unseen Currents, where I chronicled the moments when unease surfaced without cause. Writing helped me witness those episodes impartially, turning enemies into acquaintances. One entry described how a sudden silence during a phone call sparked a spiral of catastrophic thoughts. What if the person was angry or upset? Yet, reviewing the entry days later, I realized none of those imagined disasters occurred. This practice revealed a disconnect between perception and actuality, helping me approach future episodes with curiosity rather than dread. One afternoon during a nature walk, I observed how animals respond to their environment. A bird perched quietly on a branch seemed completely at ease, yet at the slightest rustle of leaves, it was instantly alert, ready to fly but calm until then. This contrast highlighted for me the difference between being genuinely prepared and being perpetually unsettled. The bird's ability to rest while maintaining readiness felt profoundly wise, a balance I aspired to cultivate within myself. Instead of always bracing for catastrophe, it had the grace to breathe fully when the air was still. A turning point arrived during a conversation with my sibling, where I confessed how my anticipation often shadowed moments meant for enjoyment. Meals with friends, weekend outings, celebrations. "You live life on edge," they said quietly. I had never recognized how exhaustingly vigilant I had become until that moment. It dawned on me that my incessant expecting of misfortune was a heavy garment I wore daily, weighing down the natural lightness of existence. They suggested practicing deliberate moments of trust, times when I consciously released the need to predict what might go wrong, even in small ways. One morning, I started with a simple experiment. While waiting for my coffee at a cafe, I allowed myself to sit fully in the moment, absorbing the aroma, the warmth of the mug, the gentle hum of conversations, without looking for signs of disaster. Initially, my thoughts flickered to possible faults. What if the coffee was bad? What if traffic after was unbearable? But I noted how the anxiety subtly softened with each mindful breath, the present moment beginning to stretch wider and feel less threatening. It was a small yet meaningful breakthrough, unlocking a gateway to experience this world without the filter of relentless suspicion. When work felt overwhelming, I also began scheduling peace pauses, brief breaks where I would stop all tasks, close my eyes, and focus on my body's sensations. In those moments, I allowed myself to feel grounded, no longer as a participant in an ongoing crisis, but as an observer of calm currents beneath the noise. This practice didn't erase worry but created pockets of reprieve, strengthening my resilience over time. Looking back, I understand now that these patterns don't dissolve overnight. They require patience, repeated gentle redirection of attention, and a willingness to meet ourselves without judgment. Every episode of self-awareness is a victory, a reclaiming of space stolen by anticipated turmoil. In living with this heightened sensitivity, I am learning to become both witness and guardian of my inner landscape, steering it toward steadiness. There is a unique courage in sitting quietly with discomfort without fleeing or fighting, and in that silence, transformation quietly unfolds. Late one evening, I found myself wandering through a dimly lit park, the chill in the air pressing against my skin like an unspoken secret. The crunch of leaves beneath my shoes echoed in the quiet, yet my mind was louder. It wasn't just about awareness. I was ensnared in a pattern of relentless vigilance, as though invisible threads of worry tethered me to a looming shadow. Even as the moon poured silver light over the empty benches, I was unable to abandon the sense of impending disturbance. It woke something primal inside me, an instinctive dance between hope and dread, and I realized that this subtle unrest was less about the surroundings and more a storm rehearsed within. In this strange state, my mind transformed ordinary events into complex riddles to be solved. I recall a morning when a delayed text message ignited an avalanche of conjectures. Instead of thinking, "They must be busy," my story twisted into "They're upset. Something's wrong." It was a cascade effect, where innocent silences morphed into distant quarrels or neglected bonds. I felt trapped within a maze of imagined consequences, each turn leading deeper into a labyrinth of anxiety. It struck me how easily the imagination can betray us, weaving intricate tapestries of imagined disasters that steal our presence and peace. During that phase, I spoke with a therapist who introduced me to the concept of mental triggers, subtle cues from daily life that awaken dormant fears. We talked about how certain words, tones, or environments might subtly rewind old tapes, drawing from memory banks where past stress hid. One vivid example came from a recounting of how a simple raised voice unleashed an avalanche, not because of the current argument itself, but due to echoes of childhood uncertainty still echoing faintly yet persistently in the background of the mind. This insight lit a lantern in the cavern of my thoughts, the path from now to then, where specific stimuli stoke residual fears. One afternoon, walking through a bustling marketplace, I observed how people navigated their worlds with different rhythms. Some moved smoothly, attuned to change without resistance, while others hesitated at every unexpected noise. I pondered how internal conditioning molds the way we read and respond to our surroundings, like tuning an old radio, sometimes with static drowning the signal. That realization dawned with particular force. I wasn't uniquely wired for turmoil, but carrying a symphony improvising in a minor key, unaware it could be reorchestrated. I began experimenting with breath work during times when the tension felt strongest. Instead of fighting the mounting unease, I focused on the rise and fall of inhalations, as if swimming through a fog rather than against it. One evening, while sitting on my porch, I noticed the wind stirring leaves gently. Each breath echoed that rhythm, slow and steady. This simple mimicry introduced an unexpected softness into previously rigid moments. It was as though my body could relearn fluidity, stepping away from habitual tightness and fear-based rigidity toward openness and ease. Reading poetry and listening to music became another unexpected balm. I was drawn to verses that captured the fragile tenderness of being human, the vulnerability, the longing, and the silent strength lurking beneath. One poem about the impermanence of storms reminded me how even the darkest weather eventually yields to calm skies. The metaphors quietly nurtured resilience, teaching me that temporary unrest doesn't define the whole story. Art offered a mirror to my internal landscape, reflecting back a humanity not broken, but beautifully flawed and capable of growth. One unforgettable night, caught in the midst of a thunderstorm, I stepped out onto the porch, letting the rain soak through my clothes. The thunder roared loud and wild, yet beneath it all was a steady pulse, an undercurrent of raw power and renewal. I realized then that vulnerability could coexist with strength, that surrendering to discomfort didn't mean defeat, but often the prelude to transformation. The storm outside was mirrored inside me, a volatile yet vital energy ready to be harnessed rather than feared. As these realizations deepened, I noticed how conversations shifted. Where before I might have anticipated conflict or misreading, I began to listen more openly, giving others the space they deserved rather than racing ahead with my projections. Trust, once elusive, grew like a fragile flower nurtured by patience and self-awareness. Extending this mindset toward myself became equally essential, learning to acknowledge moments of unrest without judgment or the urgency to fix. Now, consider the next time uncertainty gnaws at your chest during a normal afternoon or your mind wrestles with unseen threats. What if instead of fueling the spiral, you paused and invited curiosity? What stories are you telling yourself? How might shifting the narrative open a door toward liberation rather than imprisonment? I've come to see that this pattern isn't an enemy to defeat, but a messenger to understand, a whisper that invites us to examine our internal scripts and decide which to rewrite and which to kindly release. It's not about denying reality. It's about stepping outside the perpetual cycle of anticipatory dread and learning the grace of presence. The layers of tension don't vanish overnight, but with compassion and practice, the grip loosens enough for life's colors to pierce back through. In this unfolding, we reclaim choice, acknowledging shadows without succumbing to their control, allowing room for genuine ease to flourish even amidst uncertainty. There was an afternoon when I found myself sitting alone in a quiet room, sunlight spilling through the window in golden streams, gracing the surfaces with warmth and calm. Yet inside, an invisible current thrummed, a low and steady buzz beneath my skin that refused to settle. A voice inside whispered, "Be ready. Stay alert." I recognized this as a voice shaped not by present facts, but by memories long stored, echoes of past tensions resurrected without warning. Despite the peace surrounding me, my body remained suspended in a subtle tautness, as if caught between two worlds, one safe and serene, the other fraught with unseen hazards. I realized then that such persistent internal unrest behaves like an old film tape stuck on repeat. painting shadows that don't match the brightness of the room. The subtlety of this inner tension lies in its ability to spray doubt like fine mist over the fabric of daily life. It colors interactions and thoughts, warping how circumstances are interpreted. I recall a conversation with a colleague that should have been routine, but instead left me restless long afterward. Every neutral comment was sifted through with skepticism, and pauses became loaded with silent accusations. I could feel myself withdrawing beneath a veneer of calm, like a sea turtle retreating into its shell without truly escaping the currents outside. It dawned on me that the layers of caution had formed a protective armor that paradoxically isolated me from genuine connection. A groundbreaking insight came during a creative workshop where I was encouraged to draw my internal landscape as a series of shapes and colors. At first, I hesitated, uncertain how to translate abstract emotions into images. But then I sketched swirling vortexes of dark blues and grays, interspersed with fragile threads of golden light. This visualization made palpable what had been amorphous before, the tug-of-war between restless apprehension and fleeting moments of hope. Sharing my piece with the group sparked a ripple of understanding. Others recognized their own shadows mirrored in my drawing. Through art, a bridge was formed between my silent internal dialogue and the shared human condition, illuminating how invisible turmoil manifests uniquely yet universally. On days when anticipation of upheaval surged, I began to notice how my mind's alchemy transformed even the smallest uncertainties into towering cliffs of anxiety. For instance, a delayed reply to a simple text message no longer felt trivial. It morphed into a harbinger of rejection or abandonment. The consequence was a tightening grip around my thoughts, a suffocating spiral that left me breathless and fatigued long before any actual negative news appeared. That pattern of amplifying mild signals into overwhelming scenarios operates almost like a magnifying glass, scorching the delicate balance of my calm. Recognizing this distortion became a crucial turning point, inviting me to question automatic conclusions and dismantle exaggerated threats one by one. Another layer I explored was how deep-rooted beliefs about vulnerability influenced this restless vigilance. I grew up believing that showing uncertainty equated to weakness and that maintaining control meant safety. In reflecting on this, I saw how those beliefs seeded an internal war, suppress emotions to appear strong, yet endure a simmering storm beneath. Gradually, I learned to reframe vulnerability as a gateway to connection and resilience, rather than a flaw requiring concealment. An unexpected breakthrough occurred when I allowed myself to share this inner struggle honestly with a trusted friend. The relief that followed was immediate, the burden lifted by authentic exchange, gently dissolving walls constructed from years of self-protection. During a late evening walk, the quiet rhythm of my footsteps on gravel served as an anchor against racing thoughts. As the city lights flickered overhead, I imagined my mind as a restless ocean, waves driven by the wind of past experiences. I began experimenting with a practice of focusing on physical sensations, the cool night air brushing my skin, the steady pulse in my wrists, which gently carried me from turbulent imaginings into the present moment's solidity. This bodily mindfulness functioned like a compass, reorienting me when mental storms threatened to sweep me out to sea. Over time, cultivating this grounded awareness became a refuge, a place where alert attention no longer defaulted to alarm, but could rest in quiet observation. Now, consider how all of this unfolds during everyday encounters, waiting in line, driving through traffic, or pausing between tasks. At first, these pauses often feel suffused with an unexplained urgency, a tension that demands something is about to unravel. But shifting attention toward the sensory details around us, such as the subtle hum of voices, the textures beneath our fingertips, or the cadence of breathing, can break this cycle. It's as if we're learning to untangle a tightly knotted thread, gently coaxing it loose rather than forcefully pulling it apart. By fostering such awareness, we create fissures within habitual tensions, cracks through which light and calm seep back in, rewriting the inner narrative with fresh possibility. There was a day not long ago when I sat across from someone I deeply respected, sharing a conversation that should have felt easy and natural. Yet beneath my words, An undertow of unease pulled at my chest. Suddenly, a thought cut through my calm. What if I say the wrong thing, and this moment shatters? The unpredictability of that little voice was jarring. It came from nowhere, yet held tremendous power. I realized that uncertainty, even fleeting, had established a permanent residency in my mind, imprinting a habit of suspicion on the most routine interactions. Instead of welcoming spontaneity, I found myself anticipating rupture, bracing for cracks underfoot that might never appear. As the conversation unfolded, I noticed subtle physiological cues. My jaw tightened, palms grew clammy, and my pulse quickened without obvious trigger. But what surprised me was how my breath adopted a shallow rhythm, a mechanical cadence that mirrored the tightening grip around my thoughts. Breathing became a battlefield between awakening anxiety and a desire to reclaim solace. In that moment, I decided to test a new approach I had been reading about, deliberately expanding my inhale into a deep, grounded breath, holding briefly, then releasing slowly. The effect was almost immediate, an easing of tension, a softening of the automatic urgency that had taken hold. The shift wasn't revolutionary, but it was meaningful. It was like pressing a reset button inside a machine that had been running on overdrive. Later, during a quiet walk through a neighborhood park, I reflected on how this physiological link plays a subtle yet profound role in shaping emotional experience. Our bodily reactions do more than signal internal states. They can also guide transformation. I imagine my internal landscape as an intricate ecosystem where breath serves as a gentle river, capable of flooding dry valleys or irrigating parched fields. By consciously modulating this flow, I glimpsed a gateway into recalibrating my internal balance. This insight compelled me to incorporate breath-focused pauses into moments when unease stirred, planting seeds of calm before doubt could overtake clarity. One evening, I experimented further, sitting cross-legged on my floor while soft music played in the background. I combined breath awareness with gentle movement, subtle stretches that activated muscles often neglected in daily routine. As my body unfurled, I discovered sensations locked beneath years of tension, like branches restrained by invisible bindings. With each breath and deliberate motion, I felt those invisible ties loosen, allowing energy to course more freely, and a quiet confidence emerged in tandem. Movement became a silent dialogue between pressure and release, teaching me that embodiment is integral to releasing the grip of relentless anticipation. That week, I also kept a journal, but unlike before, I focused on tracking physical sensations accompanying moments of heightened expectation. Writing down the shifts in heartbeat patterns, muscle tightness, or even that faint tremor in my hands helped translate abstract feelings into concrete observations. It felt as though I were mapping an uncharted territory with fresh eyes, making subtle connections that had eluded me when attention stayed fixated solely on mental chatter. Armed with this awareness, I began to notice early warning signs earlier, allowing me to intervene sooner with breath or movement to disrupt escalating tension. During a family gathering, I encountered another testing moment. A relative's sharp tone could have triggered the usual rush of internal alarms, but instead, I invited myself to pause and scan how my body registered the words before the mind spiraled into hypothesizing worst-case scenarios. I pictured my muscles as a bridge and chose to avoid building barricades across it, opting instead to let the words pass through like passing travelers, not threats to be battled. It was radically freeing to witness that space between stimulus and reaction, an invitation to choose a different path than reflexive fear. From that vantage, trust felt less like a naive hope and more like practiced courage. This journey illuminated an unexpected truth. The way we engage with subtle bodily clues profoundly shapes our psychological landscape. With practice, expanding awareness from cognitive patterns alone to include physical rhythms offers a more holistic path to dismantling distress. I discovered that persistent foreboding can anchor itself within tension held in muscles, disrupted breathing, and posture shaped by silent vigilance. Shifting these physical markers is like loosening a knot tied tightly for years. It takes patience, but creates room for freshness and relief. Now, consider your own daily interactions, especially where uncertainty tends to ignite internal alarm bells. How might integrating such embodied practices, intentional breathing, mindful movement, and attentive body scanning, shift your habitual responses? What internal narratives could be rewritten when you add the language of sensation to the dialogue, opening gateways seldom accessed by words alone? For me, these tools have become trustworthy companions, subtle navigators steering me away from the cliff face of imagined crises toward paths where ease and presence endure. Reflecting on our journey so far, I sense the rhythm of something quietly unfolding beneath the surface, an intricate dance between awareness and surrender, tension and release. It's as if we've been navigating a dense forest where shadows shift with every step, sometimes revealing glimpses of light filtering through branches that once seemed impenetrable. There is a peculiar kind of weight in carrying an invisible tension, one that molds the contours of our days and colors the spaces between moments. Yet, as we move through it, an awareness grows, like roots stretching deeper into fertile earth, anchoring us in ways we hadn't imagined possible. I recall a moment when the usual hum of vigilance began to soften, not with a sudden jolt or grand epiphany, but through the patient unraveling of something tightly coiled inside. It felt like watching dawn break across a misty valley, a slow brightening that doesn't shout its arrival, but whispers in gentle hues and softened edges. In the quiet spaces between breaths, a subtle transformation took hold. The part of me that had carried constant alertness began to loosen, revealing an untapped reservoir of calm just beneath the surface. It was not a conquering of the restless undercurrents, but an invitation to dance alongside them, learning their steps rather than resisting their rhythm. This experience reminded me of how the most profound shifts tend to emerge not from resistance, but from curiosity, an eagerness to understand our reactions without judgment, without the urgency to fix or escape. I found that inviting kindness into the spaces where tension resided opened a door not only to peace, but to profound clarity. It was like tuning a finely crafted instrument. Slight adjustments, almost imperceptible, gradually transformed discordant notes into melodies that carried a different resonance. Within that resonance, the possibility of choice began to reveal itself, not the illusion of control over every ripple, but the freedom to respond differently, to rewrite the scripts etched by countless rehearsals of unease. I think about how this subtle interplay between instinct and consciousness shapes our experience. It's akin to navigating a river whose waters sometimes surge with unexpected force, while at other times flow with serene certainty. We may not always command the current's direction, yet we can learn to adjust our sails and trust in the journey. Amidst swirling thoughts and sudden anxieties, the act of grounding ourselves, in body, breath, or presence, becomes an anchor, tethering us to a harbor within the tumult. It is in cultivating that steady line to the present that we begin to reclaim a sense of spaciousness, where moments are no longer swallowed whole by the anticipation of what could unravel. There were instances when shadows lurked longer than comfort allowed, and I wanted to turn away, retreat into numbness or distraction. But something whispered to me, quietly insisting that confronting these shadows yielded a paradoxical lightness, that what weighs us down is often entangled with what can set us free. Each encounter deepened my understanding of resilience, not as the absence of vulnerability, but as the courage to sit with discomfort until it softens, revealing new angles of strength previously hidden in plain sight. You've been alongside me through these subtle awakenings, the moments when patterns began to shift and the space around them expanded. Together, we've traced the contours of uncertainty and mapped the delicate tension between waiting and moving forward. It's a journey marked by patience, perseverance, and, above all, compassion for ourselves as we navigate terrains both familiar and unfamiliar. The road up to this point has been winding, layered with silence and sound, light and shadow, fear and hope interwoven in a complex tapestry. As the horizon stretches just out of reach, inviting yet demanding, I sense that the true turning point is near, not far from us, but close enough to feel its breath. We've tilled the soil. The seeds have been planted in the fertile ground of awareness. What remains is to nurture them with intention, to lean into the invitation to make peace with the tension that once felt unyielding. The path ahead asks us to trust the subtle currents that carry these transformations, even when the destination is unseen. And so, with cautious hope and steady heart, I find myself ready to take the next step. I remember a particular evening that etched itself into my memory, not because of any dramatic occurrence, but because of a quiet realization that settled deep within me. I was sitting quietly by a window, watching the sky shift from soft hues of peach into rich indigos, the world outside fading gently into night. Inside, the habitual unrest stirred faintly, a low murmur beneath my skin. Yet, this time, I didn't rush to push it away or fight against it. Instead, I allowed myself the space to simply notice it, to observe the restless whispers not as enemies to be vanquished, but as old echoes searching to be understood. In that moment, the layers of unease began to loosen, not by force but through gentle acknowledgement. It struck me how often I had mistaken this stirring for a harbinger of disaster, as though the subtle trembles inside were messengers of doom rather than signals of learned protection. There was a shift in me then, a dawning awareness that these sensations were not my captors but parts of a story, threads woven through my experience that could be unraveled and rewoven with new meaning. The invitation to meet those currents with kindness taught me a profound lesson. True freedom grows not from denial, but from compassionate presence. I realized how much power I had silently surrendered by allowing silent alarms to dominate my inner world, preemptively drafting tales of what might unravel before my eyes had even turned. This surrender had shaped many decisions, kept me tethered to shadows and hesitant steps. Yet in accepting the uncertainty without collapsing beneath its weight, I glimpsed the possibility of balance, where preparedness coexists with openness and vigilance gives way to grace. It felt like breathing deeply after holding my breath for so long, an exhale rich with relief and possibility. There is a certain courage required to face such quiet turmoil without resistance. It asks for patience that softens the urge to escape and a willingness to embrace moments of discomfort as space is rich with potential transformation. I found that the more I practiced this, the more these experiences ceased to control my narrative. Instead, they became signposts guiding me toward deeper self-awareness and self-compassion. The tension once dictating my rhythm gradually shifted into a dialogue, a constant unfolding where I was not an adversary, but an ally to the complex inner terrain. I sense now that living beneath the shadow of unseen thread is a shared human thread, a hidden current many of us swim against with varying degrees of awareness. Understanding this collective experience fosters connection and reminds me that none of us navigate uncertainty alone. Yet amid shared vulnerability, there lies an individual journey, a unique reclamation of peace and presence that begins with the choice to engage with internal unrest differently. It is, in essence, the brave act of rewriting the maps etched into our cells and stories, creating pathways grounded in trust not just in the outside world, but within ourselves. In the quiet moments that follow waves of anticipation, I have learned to listen differently, to the subtle rhythms of my breath, to the gentle unfolding of sensations beneath the skin, to the stillness that often hides quietly behind the storm. This refined listening tastes like freedom, a soft unraveling of tension that opens a door to possibility. It reminds me that the future is not a territory preordained to misfortune, but a canvas ripe for creation, where peace can be chosen even in the presence of uncertainty. I want to offer this reflection as an invitation rather than a prescription. If ever you find yourself caught in a similar dance with silent alarms and restless anticipation, I hope you grant yourself the same grace. Meet the stirring inside with curiosity, engage the uneasy currents with tenderness, and carve pockets of calm, not by conquering fear, but by befriending it. In that space, even amidst shadows, a new light begins to flicker, a quiet grace that can sustain us through the unseen storms, transforming transient unrest into enduring resilience. And in that resilience, we reclaim not just our breath, but the full spectrum of life's unfolding possibilities.